State capture, those are words that many South Africans have come to understand and be familiar with. This, of course, in the wake of alleged corruptions around state-owned entities in the Zuma era. One of the big fallouts has been around global firm SAP and what it knew when it entered into contracts with Gupta-controlled companies and received kickbacks, or rather paid kickbacks for contracts with parastatals like Transnet and Eskom. Joining us now is Susan Comrie from Amabhungane, whose latest investigations with the SABC have revealed a lot more was known than was admitted at the time. Susan, good evening to you and thank you for talking to us. Just paint a picture of where this all comes from. I know last year there was a big denial by SAP in terms of what they said they knew. We now know that wasn't true.
Yeah, well, I think what we can see is that the version of the truth that SAP has given us has been kind of a budget version of the truth. You'll remember, as you said, last year they came out, their first reaction to the story was to say these allegations are unsubstantiated, unfounded. They very quickly retracted that and launched an investigation, which took them about 8 months to come back and say, okay, we paid these Gupta-linked companies.
Let's just,
Sure.
call a spade, so to speak. I mean, at the height of the state capture project, you write, SAP walked into Transnet and Eskom with contracts worth more than R1 billion after promising Gupta-linked or Gupta-controlled companies kickbacks of R100 million. In simple terms, the lure of money was just too great to resist.
Absolutely, and that's sort of one of the things that we've been looking at is the way in which companies like SAP, and in this case SAP specifically, gets these huge contracts that, the biggest contracts that they'd ever got was sort of during this period in South Africa where we know that there was an incredible amount of state capture, that the Guptas were sort of acting as gatekeepers to certain institutions. And, as you've just said, the institutions that they walked into were the ones that were most deeply captured.
Help me understand firstly. I mean, how are we expected to understand or even believe that a global firm with a reputation of SAP needed these intermediaries to begin with?
Well, that's one of the sort of puzzling things for us, and the response from SAP has always been, well, this is how business is done. This is how business is done globally, is that we pay these third parties. Now, their description of what those third parties are meant to be, they're meant to be people who go and identify opportunities that SAP had never known about. Now, in this case, we're talking about Eskom and Transnet, established clients of SAP. And you have a company that has seemingly no experience in selling software and in SAP products coming in and being given absolutely enormous chunks of these deals. And the services that they perform, even SAP themselves said when they looked at it, they were very doubtful that those services had been delivered. I
mean, in one instance, the company was formed just weeks before and was at the center of a massive deal.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that we've sort of looked at. From what the big takeaway from this recent investigation is that there's sort of two periods in SAP's dealings with the Guptas. There's the period up until the middle of 2016, where perhaps they could claim that they didn't know about the Gupta dealings because of duplicitous sales staff, because of a very shoddy due diligence. And there's the period after that. And what we're sort of saying is, when it became obvious to you that you were paying these massive commissions to the Guptas, when you had been warned who the Guptas were and how they sort of acted as gatekeepers to state contracts. And then another company comes along and agrees to buy the Guptas' shares. And this company looks a whole lot like a front for the Guptas. They were empowered as a company to go and ask a lot more questions, to conduct audits, to establish whether or not that was true. Instead, despite the fact that they were warned this company could well be a front for the Guptas, they went ahead and did business with them.
In fact, you say that they had their own internal red flags that were raised. You also say this wasn't just a case of a few executives in South Africa turning a blind eye, but indeed at the very highest levels, not only here, in Germany and the US, they knew what they were getting themselves involved in and they turned a blind eye.
Absolutely. I mean, it looks like the local compliance team had written to the head of global compliance, who's based in Philadelphia, and had said, look, we want to go ahead with new deals with this company, but there is a chance that the Guptas are still acting in the background. Rather than going and finding out if that was true, or saying, you know what, it's not a risk we're willing to take. The company said, well, that's good enough for us, let's carry on.
Now, we know that there are probes in the UK, we know there are probes even in the United States as far as legislation in those jurisdictions is concerned, and there's even suggestions that some of these may carry penalties of what, up to millions of rands or life imprisonment.
I mean, that's the fascinating thing for us. In amongst the documents that we got was a letter from SAP's lawyers, and this is before they signed the final big contract with Eskom, warning them about all of the different anti-corruption legislation that they would be subject to if it turned out that the payments they were about to make were facilitation payments or corrupt payments of some sort. Despite those warnings, it looks like SAP went ahead. The interesting thing is that some of the legislation that they're subject to, particularly in the US, it says it doesn't really matter whether or not you knew. If it's a question of whether you ought to have known what was going on. And the point that we're trying to make with this story is to say, look, it was pretty obvious what was going on. There's no evidence that SAP turned around and said for 1 second, hang on a second, who is this company? Why are they going to be able to get us deals that the best sales staff that we have in South Africa can't get with our most trusted clients?
Part of what we've seen around the state capture matter is that maybe executives went into some of these arrangements thinking South Africa, relatively speaking, is a small player, in terms of global, trade. They would get away with a lot of these deals. People would look away. Might we now see SAP go the way of Bell Pottinger, for example, yet another casualty of the Gupta state capture project?
Look, I think, as someone pointed out the other day, it's a lot easier to dump your PR firm or your accountants than it is to dump, the company that provides the IT architecture on which your business runs. So I think SAP, although it has faced a lot of criticism, its business hasn't been that hard hit because it is a huge job for companies to say we're not going to do business with them anymore. So I think, we'll see. I think they definitely have questions to answer. And part of our sort of motivation of doing this story was because we had seen how the sort of follow-up investigations, how flimsy those had been.
So we talk about consequences in terms of probes in the UK and the US. Here at home?
That's a good question. As far as I know, it is on the radar of some of the organizations that are looking at it. But, as we've always said, these are incredibly complex crimes. This is not a case of one-to-one bribery. It's not a case of I give you a bribe and you give me a contract. What SAP has sort of said from their investigation is, well, there's no evidence that we directly paid people in Transnet and Eskom.
But wink, wink, a bribe, a kickback, a rose by any other name?
I mean, look, that was never the allegation that it was one-to-one bribery. The allegation was that they had been part and parcel of a broad conspiracy called state capture. Now, that requires quite specialist skills to go in and really provide and prove that evidence and close the loop. We'll have to wait and see whether or not the Hawks have the interest in actually going and doing that tough work.
So as you say, maybe SAP is too big to fall for this kind of thing, but certainly a lot of the executives who are making the decisions need to face some consequence, or all of this will be meaningless. I mean, it isn't just about placing people on leave, having them resign, and everything evaporates.
Well, that's sort of been I think that's a trend we see a lot with companies who get caught in trouble, They charge people, there's a negotiated exit, the people leave, and they throw up their hands and they say, well, we did as much as we could. And, I think that's not good enough. I mean, I think it's quite clear here that there are a number of people, if you look at the one deal alone, 13 people stretching from South Africa to Germany to the US all signed off on the deal. Now, they wouldn't necessarily have had the intimate detail about it, but they could have stopped and said, we're paying 25% of this deal to companies who supposedly have provided business development services. Let's stop and ask who these companies are, what services they actually provide.
What are SAP saying now?
They've given a brief statement. They're basically in a position where they say they can't or they won't discuss detailed questions because of the ongoing investigation by the US DOJ. But they have given a brief statement saying, yes, that it is true that they became aware of the Gupta involvement in 2016, but that all the subsequent involvement, well, they didn't quite know it was the Guptas.
Angaz. Susan Comrie from Amabhungane, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Well, let's take a quick